Hi everyone, welcome to Poisonous People. Have you ever wondered if you or someone you know might be in a cult? How would you be able to tell for sure? Well, in this video, we're going to be looking at some of the signs of a cult, but instead of just rattling off a list of signs, we're going to go much deeper and we're going to actually attempt to diagnose a cult. Now, that might sound strange because typically when we think of diagnosing, we think of medical conditions and mental health conditions. But the truth is that a diagnosis, the act of diagnosing, is nothing more than an investigation or analysis of the cause or nature of a condition, situation, or problem. So truthfully, we can diagnose anything. We can diagnose engine trouble. And in this video, I'm going to dust off my 2002 Masters Thesis when I originally suggested that in order to understand if something's a cult or not, we need to diagnose it. So let's look at the diagnostic criteria that I wrote back in April of 2002. Now, the first section here is the characteristic symptoms. And I begin by stating my definition of a cult. I made a previous video in which I went over this definition in detail and I broke it down piece by piece so that we can fully understand the intention behind each component that I put into the definition. So for now, I'm just going to say that the first thing that we need to make sure of when we're diagnosing a cult is that we're actually dealing with something that fits this definition. The next thing I say is, and two or more of the following. So let me list the 10 signs that I thought were indicative of a cult at that time. And they are a rigorous group mentality, intolerance of outsiders, belief that the group, its leaders, and members are above the law, use of undue influence to control members, very little, if not no room for individuality, controversial reputation in the media, distinct leader-follower relationship present, maintaining control by enforcement of the bite model, use of deceptive recruitment techniques, and a standing requirement to recruit new members. Now, all these years later, I definitely see some problems with this list, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. But I want to address the other qualification that I wrote in 2002, and that is that our subject possesses two or more from that list that I just read, each present for a significant portion of time during a 6-month period. Let me just say, 21 years later, my older and wiser self is looking at this and saying, what the hell was I thinking? This is absurd, especially when you consider that I had been recruited, flattered, buttered up, love bombed, gang stalked, harassed, held captive for 8 hours in an apartment where I couldn't escape, and eventually had to get a police escort to every single one of my classes on my university campus. And that all happened in 4 months. So it's kind of funny that I would write this. What was I thinking? I don't know. But today I would say strike that 6-month requirement. So that's the first slap on the wrist that I would give my 2002 graduate student self. Now that that's out of the way, let's look again at this list of symptoms. And the first thing I want to do is I want to eliminate a couple of these things because they're not necessary or they no longer apply. So the first thing I'm going to eliminate from this list is number 4, use of undue influence to control members. Undue influence is absolutely a requirement and it is already accounted for in the definition. So we don't need to state it here again. We're going to get rid of it in 2023. The next thing that I would get rid of is number 6, controversial reputation in the media. Now, when I had written this, we had just come off the 90s where you had David Koresh, you had Marshall Applewhite and Heaven's Gate. And so I was really thinking of this small kind of fringe group that got controversial attention in the media because of their eccentric ways. All these years later, I have to say that this is no longer a good way to determine if something is a cult or not. And the reason is because if we look at very, very large cults on a macro level, to the point where it's a dictatorship, a totalitarian regime of a country, those type of cults do maintain control of their citizens through control of the media. So when you're in that type of environment, the media are definitely going to smear certain people, not because those people are controversial per se, but because the cult is controlling the media and they want to smear their opponents through the news. So we can't just rely on what the news tells us. If the news says this group bad, we don't want to take their word for it. We want to be able to think for ourselves and analyze these groups, their actions on our own without having to be told this is a cult. Okay, so now that we clean that up a bit, we're left with 8 signs of a cult. And when I look at this list again, I'm kind of thinking that some of this is a little redundant. It's a little bit repetitive. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the signs that I kind of feel are similar, and I'm going to put them into categories. So the first category we're going to look at, I'm going to call a group mentality. And I'm going to put number 1, 2, and 5 under group mentality. So number 1 is a rigorous group mentality. And all these years later, I don't even know what I meant when I wrote that. So how could you possibly know what that means? Well, I'm going to leave it though. I'm going to leave it because it's just vague enough to include anything we might not have thought of. It could include everything from the people looking and speaking and walking and talking alike to the people being very, very loyal to the group. So we're just going to leave it at that. But I'm also going to put number 2 in this group. Number 2 is an intolerance of outsiders. Cults typically are very intolerant of outsiders. They don't want an outside influence because that gives the members, the cult members, an alternative point of view. The cult doesn't want you thinking for yourself. So they want to feed you all the information. They want you to adopt the thoughts that they're programming into you. And outsiders don't think like the cult does. So you're going to notice that the group is going to be rabidly intolerant of outsiders. In the group mentality, I'm also going to add number 5. Very little, if not no room for individuality. Maybe everybody dresses the same, speaks the same, has kind of the same vibe. You know, nobody really has much of a different personality. But by and large, you're really going to see that there's no room for individual thought. So those are just some examples of what we mean by a group mentality. Now, let's look at some other signs that are in this list, and let's see if we can clean this up more and group it together. And so I'm going to make a second category, and I'm going to call that leadership. And I'm going to put number 3, number 7, and number 8 in this category. Number 3 is the belief that the group Its leaders and members are above the law. And that's pretty self-explanatory. Cults will typically justify their actions, even if they're illegal, because they believe that they're above the law. When there's a distinct leader present, the leader is the one influencing the people to break the law or do things that they would never dream of doing outside the cult. But even when there's not a distinct leader present, sometimes the group members can collectively band together and believe so strongly in a certain ideal that they collectively see themselves as above the law. Why do I include that in leadership? Well, because if you consider yourself above the law, in a sense, you are the law. Now, that being said, the other piece I would put in this category is number 7, a distinct leader/follower relationship present. This is typically understood. I mean, it's universally understood that this is a requirement for a classical understanding of what a cult is. But there are some very decent arguments in the literature that would say that sometimes there's no leader present, and sometimes the followers are very loyal, not necessarily to the leader, but to an idea or to an image of a person. Another thing I would put under the leadership category is number 8, maintaining control by enforcement of the BITE model. And I'm not going to talk too much about the BITE model here, but for now, what you need to know is that the BITE model is an acronym for behavior, information, thoughts, and emotion. And basically, there needs to be some sort of controlling party, which we can loosely identify as leadership, that is enforcing some sort of control over behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. So we're going to also put that in the leadership category as well. And there's something I left out, and I want to add this into the leadership category, and that is the infallibility of the leader. Usually, if there is a distinct leader-follower relationship present, that leader is infallible. He cannot be questioned. She cannot be argued with. It's whatever this person says goes. And this is why you're also going to fall back on the group mentality idea that there's no room for individuality. You are basically being modeled into these little clones of the leader or what the leader deems is ideal. Okay, so that leaves us with just 2 more signs on this list, and they are 9 and 10. Use of deceptive recruitment techniques and a standing requirement to recruit new members. So we're going to put these 2 together in their own separate category called recruitment. And the reason we have both of them is because I can think of plenty of systems that require you to recruit other members, but that doesn't make them a cult. So cults definitely want you to recruit other members, but we want to add something else to that just to kind of be sure. And that's, of course, the deceptive recruitment practices. And as I always say, nobody wakes up and says, I think I'll join a cult today. Nobody decides to join a cult. They are always deceptively recruited. And if they knew what they were getting into, they would never get into it. So the only way that cults can get people to join is to be deceptive when they're recruiting people. They'll flat out lie. They'll leave out certain truths. They'll omit information. They'll do whatever they can to make the group as appealing as possible. Looking this over, I did leave out one very important thing, and I'm very surprised I missed this 21 years ago. So today in 2023, I'm going to be adding another category here, and that is the exit category. How easy is it to leave this group? If it's a cult, it's going to be damn near impossible to get out. And if you do get out, it's going to be punished. These people are going to harass you. They're going to make your life miserable because they want to do everything in their power to keep you from leaving. So in 2023, this is my brand new diagnostic criteria. First, the group in question has to meet the definition. And we want to see one behavior from each of these 4 categories. So we want all 4 of these categories to be represented in some way. If any of these things are missing, then it is my opinion it's not a cult. We could call it cultic. We could say that it is cult-like, that it's similar to a cult. But that doesn't mean it's a full-blown cult. In my opinion, if it has to meet all 5 of these criteria in order to be considered a full-blown cult. I didn't just stop here in my thesis. I went on to say that there are subtypes of cults, and that is going to be the subject of our next video because, you know, cults are not always about religion. There are different types of cults, and we're going to be looking at that in the next video. I'm Jen Guerriero, and this is Poisonous People. Thanks for watching.